Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the presentation of the Quarter 3 2021 Labour Force Survey, or LFS, results. My name is Jim Dalton, and I'm the statistician in the CSO's Labour Market Analysis area with responsibility for the LFS. Before getting into the results for Quarter 3, let me first reiterate some important information about the LFS. The official labour market classification of respondents to the Labour Force Survey is based on the International Labour Organization, or ILO, criteria. LFS results for Quarter 3 of 2021, like previous quarters, are published according to this criteria, and you can note that I've included the key ILO definitions and concepts in the annex at the end of this presentation, along with links to the information about the new YES regulation. CSO household survey interviews slowly returned to face-to-face interviewing at the doorstep in Quarter 3 of this year. And as a result, Labour Force Survey data for this quarter was collected by a combination of telephone and face-to-face interviewing. CSO household surveys give us a picture of the economic and social situation of the citizens of Ireland in a way and with a level of accuracy that no one else can gain. So if you were asked to take part in the CSO survey, please do so. It means that when CSO figures are quoted, you know they're accurate because you told us. COVID-19 adjusted estimates of employment volumes for persons aged 15 to 89 years and corresponding employment rates for persons aged 15 to 64 years are also included in the LFS today for the end of September and October 2021. The latest COVID-19 adjusted estimates of unemployment for September 2020 through to October of 2021 were published on the 3rd of November last. Turning now to some of the key headline results today. Using the standard ILO criteria, the unadjusted number of persons aged 15 to 89 years in employment stood at just over 2.47 million in Quarter 3 of 2021, with an associated employment rate of 72.2% for those aged 15 to 64 years. At the end of September this year, the COVID-19 adjusted measure of employment, or the lower bound of the number of persons aged 15 to 89 years in employment, is estimated to have been just under 2.37 million, with an associated COVID-19 adjusted employment rate of 69.1% for those aged 15 to 64 years. Using the standard ILO criteria again, the unadjusted number of persons aged 15 to 74 years who are unemployed in Quarter 3 stood at 149,100, with an associated unemployment rate of 5.7% for the same age group. At the end of September this year, the COVID-19 adjusted measure of unemployment, or the upper bound of the number of persons aged 15 to 74 years who are unemployed, was 232,866, with an associated COVID-19 adjusted unemployment rate of 8.9% for the same age group. Finally, the ILO defined labour force was just over 2.62 million, with an associated participation rate of 65.1%. Those not in the labour force was nearly 1.408 million. This slide shows a comparison of key labour market indicators for Quarter 3 of 2019 to 2021. In volume terms, employment and unemployment increased over the 3-year period, and this was accompanied by a fall in those outside of the labour force. The labour force participation rate also increased over the period, and this was accompanied by increased employment and unemployment rates. The increased participation rate was governed more by increased employment rather than unemployment. It should also be noted when making comparisons here that the working age population increased by 102,500 over the 2-year period. The bar chart on this slide compares the ILO status of persons who were away from work in the reference week for any reason in Quarter 3 of 2019 through to 2021. In 2019, virtually all of those away from work were still classified as employed, whereas in 2020, 78% were classified as employed and virtually all others absent were classified as inactive. The profile changed again in 2021, with 91% of those away from work still classified as employed, 3% unemployed, while 6% were classified as inactive. The CSO were able to link the LFS data for Quarter 3 with revenue data in respect of recipients of the Employment Wage Subsidy Scheme, or the EWSS, and data from the Department of Social Protection for those in receipt of the Pandemic Unemployment Payment, or the PUP. This linking of data was done in accordance with CSO data matching protocols. The criteria for linking this data this quarter is based on whether the respondent was in receipt of the PUP or the EWSS in the interview reference week in quarter 3 of this year. In this quarter, 43.2% of persons in receipt of PUP in the reference week were classified as employed, while the remainder were classified as unemployed and inactive in equal measure at 28.4%. The majority of EWSS recipients, at 94.6%, were classified as employed. Returning now to employment, and this slide compares the annual and biennial change in employment with the annual and biennial change in the number of persons away from work, and the annual and biennial change in the total hours worked each reference week. Employment increased over the year to quarter 3 2021 by 9.8%, or just over 221,000 to just over 2.47 million. This was accompanied by an increase of 19.5%, or 49,400 in the number of persons who were away from work in the reference week. The reasons for absence would include, for example, work-related training leave, illness, family-related leave and holidays. Notwithstanding the increased level of absence from work during the reference week, there was an annual increase of 6%, or 4.3 million in the total number of actual hours worked per week, from 72.7 million hours in quarter 3 of last year to 77.1 million hours in quarter 3 of this year. When compared to quarter 3 of 2019, we can see that employment increased by nearly 148,000. However, the level of absences also increased by nearly 86,000, and this meant that there was only a very slight increase in the number of hours worked over the period. The table on this slide presents absences from work during the reference week for each economic sector as a percentage share of total employment for each sector for quarter 3 of 2019 through to 2021. In quarter 3 of 2019, the overall absence rate was 9.4%, and this increased to 11.3% last year and 12.3% in quarter 3 of this year. Our analysis indicates an increase in incidence of holidays and a fall in absences due to other reasons as the reasons for absence in quarter 3 of this year. At sectoral level, the rate of absence from work over the period has not changed much for some sectors such as agriculture, forestry and fishing, wholesale and retail trade, and public administration and defence. However, the differential impacts of the pandemic are more evident for other sectors, with the rate of absence in 2021 for some being higher than it was in the previous 2 years. Some notable examples are as follows. The industry sector, where the rate of absence in quarter 3 of 2019 was 6.6%, rising to 7.3% a year later, and standing at 10.5% in quarter 3 of 2021. The financial, insurance and real estate activity sector, where the rate of absence was 8.2% in quarter 3 of 2019, falling to 7.2% in 2020, before rising to 13.6% in quarter 3 of 2021. And finally, the transportation and storage sector, where the rate of absence was 9.1% in quarter 3 of 2019, 18.3% in quarter 3 of last year, and 12.7% in quarter 3 this year. The bar chart in this slide illustrates further the data presented in the previous slide, with the grey bars showing the higher absence rate in quarter 3 2021 for several sectors when compared to a year ago. The bar chart on this slide compares the number of hours worked per week expressed in millions by economic sector for quarter 3 in each year from 2019 to 2021. As highlighted in an earlier slide, the total number of hours worked in quarter 3 2021 at 77.1 million was virtually the same as in 2019, but was higher than the 72.7 million recorded in quarter 3 of last year. While the number of hours worked per week were higher than a year ago in almost all sectors, some sectors such as information and communications, financial, insurance and real estate, and professional and scientific exceeded 2019 levels. Others such as agriculture, forestry and fishing, human health and social work activities and the other activities sector were at or very close to 2019 levels. Turning now to the economic sectors, and the following graph shows employment volumes by sector for Q3 of 2019 to 2021. Employment in Q3 of this year has exceeded Q3 2020 levels for all sectors. While a number of sectors have also exceeded Q3 2019 levels, there were some exceptions, and these are as follows. The accommodation and food services sector, which was the same as it was in Q3 2019. The construction sector, which was 2.3% or 3,500 less than it was in Q3 of 2019. The administration and support services sector, which was 5.6% or 6,100 less than it was in Q3 of 19. And the other activities sector, which was down by 1.3% or almost 1,600 from the same quarter in 2019. Turning now to employment by gender, and male employment increased by 90,000 or 7.3% over the year, while female employment increased by 131,000 or 12.8% over the year. Full-time employment was up by 6% over the year to 1.937 million, while part-time employment increased by 26.7% over the year to 533,300. The rise in part-time employment was split roughly 70-30 between females and males. The graph on the slide charts the annual volume changes in full-time and part-time employment by quarter over the past 5 years. Part-time underemployment was nearly 110,100 and accounted for 20.6% of total part-time employment in Q3. The number of self-employed persons increased by 7.9% over the year to 337,000. While the number of employees increased by 10% to nearly 2.116 million. When adjusted for seasonal factors, employment stood at nearly 2.466 million in Q3 of 2021, up by 4.8% from the previous quarter. And the graph on the slide shows the quarter-on-quarter change of the seasonally adjusted employment series over the past 5 years. Coming back now to unemployment, and as I mentioned earlier, using the standard ILO definition, the number of persons unemployed in Q3 2021 stood at 149,100 with an associated unemployment rate of 5.7%. The numbers unemployed fell by 30,100 or 16.8% from a year earlier. The graphic on the slide charts the trend in unemployment over the past 5 years. In volume terms, there were 78,600 males and 70,500 females classified as unemployed. Male unemployment was down by 14.3% over the year, while female unemployment was down by 19.4%. The long-term unemployment rate, that is persons unemployed for 12 months or longer, was up from 1.4% to 1.7% in the year to Q3. There were 45,100 persons classified as long-term unemployed in Q3, and this accounted for 30.3% of all unemployed persons. The seasonally adjusted unemployment rate was down from 7.7% to 5.5% over the quarter. And in volume terms, the seasonally adjusted number of persons unemployed was down by 35,100 to 139,500 in Q3 of 2021. And the graph on this slide charts the trend in the rate over the past 5 years. Turning now to the labour force, and the total number of persons in the labour force in Q3 was up by 7.9% or 191,900 to just over 2.62 million from a year earlier. In terms of decomposing the change in the labour force, there was a positive demographic effect of 15,900 and a positive participation effect of 175,300. On a seasonally adjusted basis, the labour force increased by 72,700 or 2.9% over the quarter to nearly 2.604 million in Q3. The next 3 slides compare key labour market indicators for males, females and all persons across 3 different periods in which we term the 2005-2008 period as pre-crash, Q4-19 as pre-pandemic, and in the current quarter. Taking males first, and male employment pre-pandemic was just slightly higher than it was in Q3 of 2007, but has now exceeded both of those levels. The rate of unemployment is higher in the current quarter than it was in the previous 2 periods. However, while the labour force for males in Q3 of 2021 is higher than the earlier periods, the participation rate is still lower than it was in pre-crash times. For females, all indicators were higher in Q3 2021 than they were in the earlier two periods. While all other indicators in Q3 for all persons are above pre-crash and pre-pandemic levels, the participation rate was still lower than it was in pre-crash times. This completes the data element of the presentation this morning, and I would now like to advise users that the CSO published a Wellbeing Information Hub in collaboration with the Department of the Taoiseach, the Departments of Finance and Public Expenditure and Reform, a wider interdepartmental working group, and the National Economic and Social Council. This hub provides indicators of well-being across 11 teams covering the broad range of life in Ireland, including health, education and work and other facets of Irish life. These will be updated when more data on any team becomes available. The link to the hub on the CSO website is shown on the slide now for your information. The work and job quality indicators are sourced from the LFS and include the following: the share of employed persons working long hours, which is defined as those who usually work 49 hours or more per week. The data is broken down by age group, sex and economic sector. The lifelong learning rate in formal education for persons 18 years and over, broken down by principal economic status and age group. And finally, labour underutilisation as a share of the total labour force, broken down by age group and sex. The graphic on slide 37 gives an outline of the range of indicator teams that are now available. Turning now to upcoming releases from the Labour Market and Earnings Division of the CSO. Firstly, the Industrial Disputes release for Q3 of this year will be published on the 30th of November next. The monthly unemployment estimates and live register figures for November 2021 will be published on the 1st and the 3rd of December next respectively. Earnings and labour cost results for Q3 of this year and the accompanying Labour Market Insights Bulletin will be published on the 1st of December next. The publication date for the Q4 LFS will be confirmed in due course, as will that for the earnings analysis using administrative data sources for 2019 and 2020. And as always, users should consult the CSO release calendar on the CSO website for upcoming releases. So, in summary for today, first of all, the results for Q3 of this year, like previous quarters, have been compiled according to ILO definitions and concepts. The effect of the easing of public health restrictions in Q3 is apparent from the results. Over the year, employment increased by 221,200, while unemployment decreased by 30,100, resulting in an increase of 191,100 in the overall labour force. Seasonally adjusted employment was up by 113,400 from Q2 2021, while unemployment was down by 35,200. The total number of hours actually worked in the reference week in Q3 was 77.1 million, up 6% or 4.3 million hours from a year earlier. The results also showed that for some sectors, the hours worked were at or above 2019 levels, but for others, differences still remain. And finally, absences from work during the reference week were just over 303,000 in Q3 compared to almost 254,000 in Q3 of last year. Thank you very much for your attention.